Hi everyone, welcome to another WiZDOM update. My name is Andrew Kubank and I'm fortunate enough to be one of the National Directors of WiZDOM. So today is video 9 in our Bank Secrets series, and that is just a series of 12 videos which cover all the little tips and tricks and secrets that we've learned having done business with banks for decades. We feel that sharing these secrets with you helps position that you can get better outcomes from financial institutions, and as a result of that, drive better success in your property journey, full stop. So look, today's video is all about valuations and the assumption that valuations are created equal. And certainly when you do business with banks, that's the impression they give you. Quite often it's a case of, you've worked through the process of getting a loan, or even if you're at the start of that loan, they will say, look, we need to do a valuation of your property. They will go and organize that. That will happen. You'll get the result. And even if you think that potentially that is more conservative than you would otherwise, expect as an outcome, they'll go, look, we're very sorry. We don't control the valuers. The valuers are separate to us, and the valuation outcome is the valuation outcome. Pretty disappointing, really. Well, the interesting thing about sitting where we sit and having the opportunity to have seen thousands and thousands and thousands of valuation outcomes is that absolutely I can tell you that valuations are not all created equal. Typically, if we get 3 or 4 different valuers to value a particular property, even with the same approach in the sense of not just desktop versus a proper valuation, I'll get to that, but even where it's, 3 or 4 or 5 different desktop valuations, or alternately, 3 or 4 different full valuations, it is unsurprising to us to see a 20% difference between the top number and the bottom number. So in real terms, that means on $1 million property, we may see $1 million as the top valuation, 800,000 or even 750,000 as the most conservative valuation. And a lot of you would say, well, how on earth is that the case? Well, at the end of the day, valuation is not an exact science. They are really just looking at your property, they're using a bunch of comparable sales and knowing other data, and then making, a judgment call on putting a number on the actual property. So it's not surprising that if you get 3 or 4 different professionals to look at exactly the same situation and then form an assumption, it's not surprising to me that there's some variation across that. Now, the truth is, we absolutely knowing that, we 100% can certainly use that to position you as best as possible when it comes to valuation outcomes. And that is both through a combination of using the different valuation types, and then of course using the way that different banks approach valuations, full stop. So first, just with regard to approach, a lot of you may not be aware that generally speaking, valuations fall into 2 broad categories. One is a desktop valuation, where quite literally, we're talking about statistical modeling. So there's an employee that works for a valuation company who is literally sitting there on a computer, they're looking up your property, Google Earth, plus looking at all the statistics, and let's say, it's a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom property in a particular suburb in Australia. They look at all the other sales and they go, well, broadly yours sits in this range, and we would call it as being X number based on all of the data we're looking at. No one goes and looks at the property, no one sees it for what it necessarily really is. It is quite statistical in its approach. Now, you might think, well, how does that get to the best outcome? Well, if your property happens to be, the worst property in a great suburb, well, quite often a desktop style approach where it doesn't, necessarily show that you have the worst property in the best suburb, can actually drive a better overall valuation outcome in comparison to a valuer going out there, looking at it, seeing that it's not necessarily the best, property in the suburb, and as a result of that, decreasing you on that overall range. If it's a pure statistical approach and it's 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom and in this suburb, well, the likelihood is that even though your property isn't great, it may drive a really great outcome. Now, the flip side to that is a different type of valuation, which is a full valuation, which is where a valuer obviously actually attends the property, takes photos, actually sees it for everything. Now, in this particular case, again, it's a judgment call at the end of the day. There is less statistical modeling that goes into this and more actual, professional appropriate approach on it. Now, again, this type of valuation can be really useful to us where you have the best property in not necessarily the best suburb. So where your property is better than average, well, the reality is we want a value to be able to see that. And as a result of that, if your property sits in a particular range of value, then the value would likely push towards the upper side of that range, rather than the middle or the lower, because, your property's nicely renovated, it's in great condition and it's better than average overall for that suburb. So you can see that just based on the type of property, its location and its current state, can absolutely, we need to start looking at the different types of valuation and taking different approaches with the valuation to maximize your valuation outcome. Now, the other thing here is that, it's also using multiple different lenders to access different valuations as well. So the reality is, for one particular bank, they will only ever want one valuation outcome with one valuer. We can't go back to a bank and say, please give us 4 different valuations. It doesn't work like that. We need to go and order multiple valuations from different banks. And the truth is that whoever, has the best valuation outcome, that's then the bank that we need to go and do business with. We can't go and take that valuation, give it to another bank and say, here, please use that one. The system doesn't work like that. And at the end of the day, the entire system is built so that it can't be manipulated for outcomes. And at the end of the day, if we're pushing on that, well, the reality is that we're, pushing on a system or using a system against itself to be able to drive the best possible outcome. Now, some of you might be sitting there thinking, well, why does this matter? Well, the truth is that a good valuation outcome can fundamentally drive then a bunch of different knock-on effects. So what I mean by that is this. Let's assume for a second that you were going through the process of getting market ready, and so you are accessing all of your equity to be the deposit and the strategy cost and your fees, charges and everything else for settlement with regard to an investment property. And let's say that one valuer, or the valuation outcomes, we got multiple valuations, and one valuation was $100,000 better than the others. Well, at an 80% lend, that means $80,000 extra that you have available to you to be the deposit and the costs and settlement and everything else. So if we assume that you were taking that extra $80,000 as deposit, and again, your investment property was going to also be at an 80% lend, well, that $80,000 substitutes for 20% in deposit and then 5% for fees and charges and everything else. So in other words, 1/4 of the cost of the investment property. So what that means, that extra $80,000 actually translates to 4 times that when it comes to the purchase price or the potential purchase price of your investment property. And that is really significant. You're talking about $80,000 translating to $320,000 in additional money that you can spend, or budget that you can spend on your investment property, just on the basis of that better valuation outcome that we had on your getting market ready or your equity release. So as you can see, what seems like not that big a deal, when it comes to just on one outcome, the knock-on effect of that can be quite significant. And as a result of that, when these things matter, they absolutely matter. And so, making sure that we get the best possible outcomes for valuations when it matters is really, really critical and can have some significant impact on what your future property journey looks like. So look, as usual, I will say that the entire WiZDOM professional team is right across this, as you would expect, and very ready, willing and able, to support you when it comes to maximizing both your finance outcomes and of course your property journey as a result of that. So please reach out. Make sure that we are, you're working closely with our WiZDOM finance professionals to maximize all of these outcomes, drive the best possible outcome that you can. Until next time, again, I really hope that was helpful for you, gives you a little bit of insight, and puts you in a good position to be able to make great decisions when it comes to your finance. So until next time, thank you for your attention. Goodbye and take care.